Oh, Mr. Kant. Okay, my old friend. Kant is one of the most famous philosophers of all time, probably second to Plato, Aristotle, and or fourth behind Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. So very famous guy. Should note, by the way, he's notoriously difficult to understand. It's not you. Everybody has a problem with it. Even though his ethics writings are much easier than his other writings, which is not saying a lot because they're still pretty difficult to read and understand. And so I will walk you through Kant's arguments fairly carefully here, I guess. The main thing that you need to understand is that is what he's arguing for. Pay particular attention to the main conclusion that he's trying to get to, which is called the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is, as I have up here at the top of the screen, I ought never to act except in such a way that I can also will that my maxim should become a universal law, or act only on that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. There's another formulation, which is the end in itself formulation. I will get to that too. Kant thinks that these are equivalent. Some people have argued that they maybe aren't, but Kant's pretty thinks that the two statements are both the same statement and just phrased differently. All right, one thing I really want to point out right at the beginning before I forget is that Kant is the most well-known and most followed, I guess, whatever, proponent of the deontological school. That is the idea that ethics is about following rules. It doesn't matter, regardless of the consequences, follow the rule. What is the rule? What is the rule that Kant wants us to follow? The categorical imperative, what I just read. Okay, that's the rule he wants you to follow to be ethical, or thinks that you should follow to be ethical. All right, it does sound very convoluted, but if you give it some thought and maybe look some words up in the dictionary or whatever, you will see that it's not that complicated, because act only on that maxim through which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law basically amounts to don't do something unless you're all right with everybody else doing that same thing, or don't follow any rule that you don't want everybody else to follow. Okay, so if you don't think it's okay for people to steal, don't steal. Whatever you do, you should be able to universalize it and say that everybody should do that same thing. Don't do what you don't want anybody else to do. It's like it's pretty close to the golden rule. I mean, think about it. It's pretty close. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Yes, it's very, very, very close to that, right? Don't do anything you don't want anybody else to do, because when you evaluate your action, you have to ask yourself the question, is it all right for everybody else to do the same thing that I am doing now? That's it. Okay, that is the moral rule for Kant. And that is all this whole book, all the readings, everything is all about trying to establish this as the rule. Now, he does argue for it. Okay, he doesn't just throw it out there. Obviously, if you've done the reading, or if you do the reading, you'll see he doesn't just throw it out there and say that's it. That would take a paragraph. No, he has a pretty elaborate argument about how to get there, to understanding why this is the rule, the moral rule, the moral law. So let's kind of run through that. I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail here, but just give you the general outline of the argument, starting with the goodwill. You'll notice that he starts talking about the goodwill at the beginning. The only thing that can be conceived of as being good without qualification is a goodwill. So he says the highest good of all is having a good will. As opposed to happiness and other measures. You will see when I talk about Mill that Mill thinks happiness is the highest good. In fact, pleasure. But Kant says the highest good, the thing that's good without any qualification, right? So without any recourse to anything else, the highest good is the goodwill. You'll hear this phrase in and of itself all the time in ethics. So meaning you don't have to relate it to anything. It's good by itself, just right on the surface of it. All right. He says other things are good, you know, fame, power, all that, but you can put those to bad uses. The highest good is just having a goodwill, plain and simple. And notice that you'll see this in the reading as well. It's repeated in different ways many times throughout the book, that consequences do not matter. All right. Oh, by the way, ignore the page numbers. They're different in this than they are in the reading I gave you. So don't try to look at the bottom of page 50. Forget it. Anyway, consequences do not matter, but you'll see that mentioned several times. Okay. Now, in terms of the goodwill, so he starts with that. That's his first premise. That's his first reason. And then he moves on to what does the goodwill mean? It has to do with duty. And he says, so if you have a goodwill, you will act out of duty. So that's step 2. First you have a goodwill, then you move on to acting out of duty and duty alone. This is a little bit dubious, or, you know, I don't know. It's kind of weird because Kant is, I don't want to, all right, I'll say, kind of typically German, follow your duty, do your duty, follow the rules. And he's like, if you do something for any other motive, he mentioned the shopkeeper not ripping people off and stuff like that, or even, you know, just because you're a nice person, hey, that's fine, that's good, and you're doing the right thing, but you're not doing it from duty. It has to be from duty, whether you like it or not, whatever, it has to be done from duty alone. You got to follow your duty, period. All right. Now, duty to what? Well, he says duty has to be to the universal law. All right. By the way, people get tripped up on this argument. They get. I want to caution you. Goodwill is just a premise for his further. It's just a stepping stone to his further argument. Some people get drawn into this notion of goodwill. Kant means something very specific about that. It's not just being like a nice guy. In fact, kind of not that at all. And then duty too. People are like, "Oh, I believe in duty because I was in the U.S. Army, or you know, or whatever, or I respect people in the military." Not that kind of duty. Duty to one thing in this argument. Duty to one thing, and that is the universal law. And the universal law is the categorical imperative. And he thinks that, like I said, I'm gonna have you read it, and I'm gonna make you read it and see how he derives that result, because he says if you have a universal duty, it can't be to any particular action or result. Again, deontological. He's not looking for results. It's follow the rule. So it has to be a universal principle, and he thinks the universal principle that just kind of falls out of this is the categorical imperative, as opposed to a hypothetical imperative. By the way, hypothetical imperative is gauged to some result. He thinks that is not the way to go. You have to you have to gauge your actions to this universal categorical imperative. All right, by the way, real quick, imperative, if you've ever taken grammar, imperative is a command. It's just in grammar, that's what they call it. And categorical is also a word. He's not making the words up here. Categorical is like you hear this when people have to testify in front of Congress and they're like, I categorically deny all the charges or whatever. It means without exception, right? I categorically deny everything. That means with no exception. So it's a law with no exceptions. That's what it means. All right. Now he gives some illustrations which are pretty interesting. Duties to the self and others, perfect, imperfect. Should you commit suicide as a universal law? He argues no. Should it become a universal law that you borrow money and promise to pay it back with no intention of ever doing so? Should you make it a universal law that you ignore your natural talents even if you have plenty of money and resources and don't need to do anything? Interesting case. And then finally, should I, as a universal law, be obligated to help anyone else? You should read these examples carefully, I think, because it does it's kind of telling. In every case, I think it's no, right? So no, you shouldn't commit suicide. But why couldn't you make it a universal law is the question. It's not totally clear. I mean, especially the thing is, it depends on how what law are you universalizing? If you're being tortured to death, should you commit suicide to get out of the rest of the torture? Wouldn't anybody want to do that? It seems like maybe. I mean, of course, if you just say suicide is a good idea for everybody, that's not that okay. I agree with Kant on that, but what if you're dying slowly of some debilitating disease, which we'll talk about later? Could you make it a universal law that people ought to be able to kill themselves in that case? It's not clear from his example that you could not universalize it and make it a general rule for everybody. The second one is the easiest one, because if you promise to pay back a loan and have no intention of paying it back, and if everybody did that, no one would ever loan anybody any money, and the whole thing would fall apart. All right, so that one is the most logical and obvious one. Should you ignore your natural talents if you don't have to use them and you have plenty of money? Again, wow. Well, I'll think about it. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. It's not crystal clear to me, Mr. Kant. It's interesting when he gets to are you obligated to help anyone else? Because he kind of hedges on that one. He's like, well, I guess maybe I don't have to do that, but I'd really like to have help if I get into trouble. Really? Seems like your ethical theory should have that as a definite yes. You should be obligated to help other people, not a maybe. Anyway, all right, so the problem here with Kant is, how do you take this universal law, this universal rule, and apply it to particular cases? And you can see from the examples that it's not that easy to do. Anyway, so on to the formula of the in itself. He argues that rational agents, being human beings in particular, but he's not ruling out any other, if aliens came and were rational agents, that'd be fine too, whatever. Rational agents are ends in themselves, and therefore they should never be used as a means. And he thinks this is equivalent to what he said before. In other words, the same thing. So rational nature exists as an end in itself. You should never treat anyone as a means. So act in such a way that you always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end. Now here, I mean, this a lot, by the way, a lot of Kantians that like this theory, there are a lot, by the way, this is a very popular theory in ethics, like the second, they like this one better. And that is, never treat anybody as a means, but always as an end. So, in other words, this kind of speaks to the dignity of human beings and the worth of human life. Never treat anyone as a means don't use anybody to try to get some further end, some further goal, right? So you never use people to get some other result, no matter what it is, right? And including yourself. This sounds very intuitive in a lot of cases. I mean, maybe you could argue that the economy would be much better if we enslaved some people, right? So let's enslave about 15% of the population, and then most people would be better off. Kant would be like, no, because you're using those people as a means to the ends of others. You can't do that kind of thing. Everybody deserves dignity and respect in and of themselves. So that makes sense. On the other hand, here's another example that kind of flies in the face of that idea, and that is, what if you're in a platoon of soldiers and someone throws a grenade and you or one of your fellow soldiers jumps on the grenade, saves the rest of the people, dies, of course, but saves the rest of the platoon, right? That guy definitely treated himself, notice it says yourself, definitely treated himself as a means to saving the other people. And in Kant's philosophy, he should be, that's wrong. You did the wrong thing. Never treat yourself as a means. And don't revere that guy because he treated himself as a means. So I don't know. Maybe I'll explore this a little bit more after I talk about Mill, who is the other side of the argument here, because he is a consequentialist and thinks that the opposite of what Kant thinks. Kant's about the means justify the ends. Follow the rules and you're okay. Mill is about results. So he's like, I don't care about the rules. See what the results are. The means justify the ends. It's the opposite of Kant. And so let's look at him and then kind of compare, maybe go back for a bit of a comparison after we see that. Anyways, yeah, good luck reading. It's not, don't be too intimidated. It takes a little bit of time to penetrate his language and his style, I know, but it is not unintelligible. And break out your dictionary, look up some words so that you know what he's actually talking about. All right, on to Mill.